You're watching
Real English
with
Real Teachers.
Real Teachers.
This short clip you're about to see is part of a full-length episode on the British English podcast.
Now we're talking about humour. Now we're talking about the social rules of humour, which is different to comedy. Comedy is a thing that is done on stage, and this is a comedy show. You pay your money, or at least you get your ticket or whatever, and you go and see a comedy show. The rules are different to using humour in our everyday interactions.
This is Luke, by the way, from Luke's English podcast.
And there's certainly a right time for making jokes like that, specific word jokes. You can't just be one of those annoying people who's constantly punning all the time in business meetings and stuff. We're now getting into the subject of British humour.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah. I like the direction that it's going. So what do you feel is towards that in the way that you're thinking?
I think we've both talked about British humour on the podcast before, and the reason for that on our podcast, the reason for that is that it seems to be a big feature of British culture, and a lot of people will talk about British humour. Like, there is such a thing as British humour. People talk about what it is and whether it's better or worse than American humour and stuff. I don't hear that many people talking about French humour. I think we talk about other things, like using France as an example. We talk about things like French food, French music, French wine, French literature, all these other sorts of things. Many, many wonderful things. But people don't often talk about French humour. It's not an internationally renowned thing, but for some reason it is with the Brits. Like, it seems to be something we're known for, right? We've got a weird sense of humour or something like that. So what is the significance of British humour in British life? And well, it seems that so we don't have exclusive rights to certain types of humour. For example, irony or sarcasm. These are not exclusively British things. No. Everyone does irony. Everyone does sarcasm. In fact, you could list all the different types of humour. I think that everyone does all of them. Maybe we do a bit more of some kinds of things, but we don't exclusively own innuendo, for example. Innuendo, right? Do I need to define it? So innuendo, which is where you say one thing, but it actually means something else that's rude, that's like sexual.
Yeah. But we've had a lot of TV shows that I don't know what decade specifically, but certainly my dad's generation grew up with kind of that sound effects of the kind of...
Hello, like, there's a sexual meaning to that. Yeah, like a lot of our TV and film comedy was based on sexual innuendo for a long time, like the Carry On films. It's all just sexual innuendo. So yeah, I guess with that we just... It's less funny these days for us, but still a little bit. I think that it's just probably something to do with our relationship to sex, and that, again, using France as an example, because this is where I live, that they're a bit more relaxed and open about sex and talking about sex. There's less of a taboo around it, whereas maybe in the UK, because of our sort of Anglican stoicism or something, I don't know what it is, that kind of emotional reserve, we're just less comfortable talking about sex. We talk about sex a lot, but there's always humour around it. We're always laughing about it. Maybe because we are a little bit uncomfortable about talking about it. We're not uncomfortable doing it. Right? I mean, that's fine. But talking about it, for some reason, we have to be funny about it. It has to be humorous. And so any time that there is something that sounds like it could have a sexual double meaning, this becomes a humorous thing, and we love to laugh on those moments. I mean, an example, just for the viewers and listeners who are still not sure what an innuendo is, let's try and think of an example. So the
obvious one is innuendo, isn't it?
Innuendo. Whose end? Your end? Yeah, exactly. Innuendo, not my endo. Yeah, that sort of thing. Or also the Great British Bake Off. Yeah, which is this Yeah, where am I going with this? The Great British Bake Off is a hugely popular TV show in the UK, right? And it's I don't know if it's still on, but it was hosted by a sort of a very proper older lady called Mary Berry, who sort of very proper. She's excellent at baking, and she's the judge, and she's helping people with their baking and stuff like that. But a lot of the time, there are lots of sexual innuendos, either coming from her. I don't know if she's doing it on purpose or not, or from other people.
She knows what she's doing.
She knows what she's doing. So, oh God, now I've got to try and think of the examples. I had some examples before when I talked about this on the podcast a while ago. So,
well, just vocabulary around cooking is very possible to create innuendos. You know, like grab your rolling pin. Oh. Yeah, there's very usually like I bet you do. Or I bet he does. You know, it's always I bet he does. In America, it's like that's what she said. Yes. Right, so, that's a good example of how they do it and how we do it. Yeah, we've adopted that definitely, but the original of that's what he said or that's what she said is ooh, or oh,
or also that's what said the nurse to the vicar. So what that does is it recontextualizes something that someone else has said in a situation that suddenly makes it kind of sexual. But I don't know why a nurse and a vicar. The understanding is that, a nurse and a vicar are talking to each other. Oh, that's going to be a bit fruity because the vicar is like not allowed to have sex, but he wants to have sex because he's a man and she's a nurse and she's in a uniform. And, there's going to be something sexual. So if it's like this. So, I like the taste of a Cox. Right. So this is...
How's that a pun?
Because they're talking about apples.
Oh.
Right?
What type?
A Cox is a type of apple. C-O-X. You don't know your apple types, Charlie.
No, I only know Granny Smith and Golden Delicious.
Yeah, well, a Cox is another one. C-O-X. C-O-X is a Cox. You never heard of a Cox orange pippin or anyway, different types of apples. So a Cox is a type of apple. So if they're talking about making apple pie or something and they're talking about different types of apple, and then Mary Berry is tasting this apple and she goes, I do like the taste of a Cox. And then one of the other presenters goes, I bet you do.
Perfect example.
That's an example.
Yeah.
So where were we, Charlie? We were talking about different types of humour and the fact that we don't have exclusive rights to them, except maybe the fact that we do enjoy certain things a bit more than others. But the thing is this, right? The thing is that I think that marks out Britain's relationship with humour is that for us, humour is everywhere all the time. And if you read Watching the English by Kate Fox, she kind of makes this point. And the idea is that we are always ready for humour, that humour is always in the air, the conditions are always there. We don't have a specific time and place for humour. It's just always possible in the air. And that's because we use humour to diffuse tension, and it's maybe something to do with our indirect communication style or something. It's also something to do with the fact that we don't want to take ourselves too seriously, or we don't want to look like we take ourselves too seriously. We don't like being too earnest and sincere about everything.
Yeah.
So we're not like, Charlie, I just, wanted to tell you that, I've really enjoyed this conversation and just, we try not to be like that. Instead, we try to keep things light, and I don't know, maybe it's a sign of some psychological issues that we have as a nation, that we can't be too sincere, but also at the same time it's an expression of the fact that we don't want to take ourselves too seriously. We don't want to seem like we think we're more important than other people. It's a way of leveling the playing field. Humor.
You're making me think that compared to other cultures, some very, very passionate ones and ones that are able to speak their mind versus the ones that are really indirect, perhaps like the Japanese or something, we're kind of like this middle sweet spot of like all of those things around us, and then it equals what we call British humour.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I think that in Japan they've. Oh, I don't know really. I lived in Japan for a couple of years. You spent time there too, right?
No.
No, you haven't. No. Okay, you've travelled lots of places, but not there.
Not Japan. No, I want to.
Yeah, but they've got pretty. I mean, their sense of humour is pretty odd as well. They're quite surreal in their humour. Maybe they're kind of similar in some ways, but yeah.
But I feel like they might not be as bold to, go for it straight away.
Yeah, these are other aspects of our humour. So we've talked about the irony, sarcasm, and innuendo and stuff. We also use humour to make fun of each other. We take the piss out of each other, but I think everyone does that. Everyone's making fun of their friends and stuff. But yeah, we also do shock humour as well in the UK, and we use humour. This is actually more comedy. I made that distinction before, humour and comedy. I think comedy on stage, there is a lot more of our comedy is sort of shocking and subversive. And a lot of our, I think some of our best comedy, TV shows and films and things, and stand-up comedy is critical or shocking, or sort of makes you think about certain things. So we get like satirical comedy poking fun at the government, comedy poking fun at other social issues, comedy with a sort of a social agenda to it, which is often comedy at its best. I mean, really, comedy at its best is whatever is making people feel good and laughing and making them think about things that they wouldn't normally think about. But often the best stuff is for me, is stuff that also has some satirical edge to it in some way. Something slightly subversive. Something that's not just going, hey, everything's great. I mean, like, Michael McIntyre is wonderful. He's a brilliant comedian. But it's not very deep. It's pretty shallow. It's more like, hey, have you noticed that, like, kids take ages to get ready in the morning, don't they? And it's stressful having children because you got to, like, make sure you put their buttons on. They've all got really small buttons. Have you noticed that buttons on kids' clothes are really small? And everyone's like, yeah, it's funny because it's true. That's fine, but it's not. It's a bit shallow. And other comedy, I like comedy that sort of takes a deeper look at either society or just existence itself, and that's the great thing about comedy. There's so many different types and things.
Yeah. I totally agree. So for listeners, we should probably wrap up soon. Getting carried away with all of this, I love it. Yeah. But for listeners who wanted a real challenge and to try and appreciate this nature of satirical humour, any examples that come to mind for you? Would Gervais be part of that or not?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Ricky Gervais does a lot of challenging stuff. I mean, I don't agree with some of the things he does. I think a lot of it he's being shocking because shock value is in comedy. Shock value kind of gets you noticed and people talk about you and stuff. And
yes,
but I think like some of his stuff is fantastic. I love. There's one particular routine. Not that I'm particularly anti-religious or anything, but there's a funny routine that he does about the story of Noah's Ark. You can find it on YouTube, and he's really making fun of a children's book which tells the story of Noah's Ark. It's like a children's Bible, and he's making fun of that and sort of pointing out the ridiculousness of the story. But he does it in a very funny way, doing the voices of different animals and things like that. So yes, he's an example of that. Oh gosh, I mean, there's so many people. James Acaster is a good one, and he's done a very funny routine about British colonialism and imperialism as a metaphor for people trying to steal your stuff. He also did another one about Brexit, which is easier to remember. And the Brexit one is that Brexit's like a cup of tea. Have you seen that?
I think so.
It's like he went to his friend's house and his friend made him a cup of peppermint tea, and his friend said, "Do you want the bag leaving in, or do you want me to pull the? Do you want the bag out of the bag? Do you want it? Do you want the bag to remain or to leave?" And then he goes off on a really interesting metaphor, a very funny metaphor about how this explains Brexit. That basically, if you pull the bag out, the tea becomes weaker and the bag just goes in the bin. You know, if you leave the bag in, then it's you've got a stronger cup of tea, and I can't replicate it.
Well, let's send them on their way to James Acaster. Yeah, or
yes.
We would probably say Acaster, but he pronounces
I'd say
it
James
Acaster.
Acaster, but he I think says Acaster. That's the Bath trap split.
Yes.
You know,
yes,
Bath,
yes.
Bath, Acaster, podcast. That north-south divide in England.
Yeah. Cool.
James Acaster, and there's many others. Sarah Pascoe, let's say her. Sarah Pascoe is very funny. And I emceed for her once, one of my claims to fame, that I hosted a show and she was the headline performer. So that was great. It was like, I never really got to a high level in the comedy world, but I did MC for a couple of comedians who are now well known. And when I see them on TV, I'm like, oh, it's my friend Sarah Pascoe, even though she's not my friend. It's just nice to imagine.